Dawn comes late in the Ardennes. A white sky hangs over Bastogne, heavy with snow and smoke. The town is surrounded. Roads cut, fields mined, woods full of German patrols feeling for a weak seam in the American ring. Along a quiet stretch of frozen roadway, a small group moves forward under a white flag. A German major, sent as an emissary from the besieging force, walks toward the American lines with a written demand. The paper is clean. The message is not. Inside Bastogne, men of the 101st Airborne Division, elements of the 10th Armoured Division, and supporting artillery units hold positions scraped into ice-hard ground. Ammunition is counted. Morphine is rationed. The wounded are stacked in cellars. The Major's ultimatum is meant to end the siege with signatures. What happens next will be decided by discipline, logistics, and fire, not words. On 16 December 1944, the German army strikes through the Ardennes in a last great gamble, Hitler's winter offensive, known to the Germans as Wacht am Rhein. The plan is blunt and desperate: smash the thin American line, cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and split the Allied armies before Allied air power and material strength can recover from the shock. At the point of attack, the weather favours Germany. Low cloud and snow choke the skies, limiting Allied aircraft. In the forested hills, visibility collapses into short, lethal distances, perfect ground for ambushes, roadblocks, and sudden armour thrusts. But the offensive runs on roads. Fuel, ammunition, and speed matter more than heroics. And in this part of Belgium, one town sits like a knot in the map: Bastogne. From here, major routes radiate in multiple directions, toward Liège, Luxembourg, and deeper into Belgium. Whoever holds Bastogne controls movement through the surrounding terrain. That is why German formations press toward it, and why American commanders decide it cannot be surrendered lightly. Because the siege that follows will decide whether the German timetable lives or dies. Bastogne is not defended by a single neat formation arriving on schedule. It is defended by whatever can get there first. In the first days of the offensive, elements of the 10th Armoured Division, combat commands and small task forces, fight delaying actions and throw roadblocks onto the approaches. Then, rushed by truck in winter darkness, the 101st Airborne Division is ordered into the town. Many paratroopers arrive without having jumped at all, delivered straight from rest areas to a battlefield that is already closing. By 1920 December, the Americans build a defensive ring. Villages and wooded ridgelines turned into strongpoints, artillery emplaced where the ground allows it, infantry spread thin but placed to cover the roads. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander, coordinates the defence as German pressure tightens from multiple directions. By 21 December, Bastogne is effectively encircled. The weather still blocks Allied air support. Supplies shrink fast: ammunition, food, medical gear, and winter clothing. In cellars and aid stations, the wounded lie under blankets that do little against the cold. Outside, in foxholes and shattered hedgerows, riflemen wait for the next probe. It is inside this tightening circle of cold, fear, and mathematics that the surrender demand arrives, and every part of the siege begins to show a different face. In Bastogne, cold becomes an enemy with its own tactics. It stiffens fingers on rifle bolts. It turns wounds into emergencies. Men sleep in bursts, minutes at a time, because the line is too thin for comfort. Medics work in dim rooms that smell of ether, smoke, and wet wool. Civilians crowd basements, listening for the change in sound that tells them whether incoming rounds are falling near or directly on the town. The American defense is not a fortress wall. It is a perimeter made of villages, road junctions, and fields of fire. Outposts and patrols try to warn of armour movement. Engineers and infantry use mines, felled trees, and wrecked vehicles to shape the roads into choke points. Artillery becomes the connective tissue, able to reach across gaps that infantry cannot fill, firing pre-registered defensive concentrations when German troops begin to gather in the tree lines. Sturmwurf. Inside the command post, leadership is mostly logistics and clarity. McAuliffe and his staff track ammunition, casualties, and the condition of each sector, because morale follows information. Orders have to be simple enough to survive confusion and firm enough to hold when radios fail and runners have to move through shellfire. All of it, the cold, the thin ring, the pressure, creates the exact moment the Germans believe can be broken with a single sheet of paper. Bastogne's defenders are short on many things, but not on methods. 105 Maison du 55 Me artillery sits behind the infantry line, firing by map and memory, shells timed onto road intersections, tree lines, and likely forming up points. Tank destroyers and a few tanks are used like movable anti-armor guns, waiting near the roads where German armor must appear. Infantry weapons do the close work. Rifles, machine guns, and bazookas held until the last possible moment, because each rocket is precious. In villages, the fight becomes a contest of angles. Who sees first? Who shoots first? Whose weapon still works when oil thickens in the cold? The Germans outside the perimeter have their own pressure. Their offensive is built on speed, and speed is bleeding away. Fighting for Bastogne house by house is costly and slow, so German commanders try another tool: intimidation. The surrender demand is meant to save time, preserve their attacking strength, and crack American cohesion with the promise of annihilation. A surrender ultimatum under a white flag is not a pause button. It is a test. If the defenders accept, the siege ends in captivity. If they refuse, both sides return to lawful combat, and the next hours are paid for in shells, blood, and exposure. The German major's paper offers a choice, but the perimeter has already been shaped to answer with force. And now the ultimatum is carried into the American command post, where a refusal must become more than a word. Late morning on 22 December 1944, the white flag reaches an American outpost on the perimeter. The Germans are searched, then guided in, blindfolded for the trip, through streets marked by shell holes and splintered brick. They are taken to the American headquarters in Bastogne, where the siege is being managed from cramped rooms under constant threat of artillery. The emissary is a German major, part of a small delegation. He delivers a written ultimatum from XLVII Panzer Corps, demanding the surrender of the encircled garrison and warning of heavy fire if the demand is refused. It is a professional document designed to sound inevitable. Inside the headquarters, the reaction is not panic. It is irritation, because the men reading it know what surrender would mean for the wounded, for the civilians, and for the entire German timetable in the Ardennes. According to multiple participants' accounts, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responds with a single word that becomes legend: enough. The staff turns that word into a formal reply, written on paper and carried back through the lines. The German officers, confused by the slang, are given the blunt translation: it is a refusal. The white flag leaves, the message is delivered, and with diplomacy exhausted, both sides return to the only language left outside Bastogne: fire. The refusal does not change the weather. It does not refill magazines or warm frozen boots. It changes something else. It removes doubt. Along the perimeter, word spreads fast, sometimes as the exact phrase, sometimes simply as the meaning: no surrender. For men in foxholes, that clarity matters. It tells every rifleman and gun crew what the day will demand, and it steadies decisions that might otherwise drift under exhaustion. Then the siege continues the way sieges always do, by pressure and probing. German infantry pushes toward the villages that anchor the American ring. Armour tests the roads. Mortars and artillery search for gun positions and command posts. The Americans answer in the only practical way available: They fight the battle in pieces, sector by sector, using every advantage the terrain still offers. Artillery becomes the first response. Fire missions land where German troops gather. On likely approach routes on tree lines that hide movement, on the road junctions that armour cannot avoid. When visibility closes, forward observers and infantry leaders call in rounds by sound, by map reference, and by hard-earned familiarity with the ground. At the front, tank destroyers and anti-tank teams stay quiet until steel is close enough to hear. Bazooka men wait behind corners and in ditches, aiming for side armour at near point-blank range, because at distance the winter battlefield swallows certainty, and then the one factor Germany cannot fully control finally shifts. Around 23 December, the clouds begin to break. Aircraft appear over Bastogne like something remembered from a different war, fighters and transports. Airdrop supplies begin to fall into the perimeter. Ammunition, medical gear, food. Not enough to make the defenders comfortable, but enough to keep the guns firing and the wounded alive. The German timetable is collapsing minute by minute. On 26 December 1944, the sound changes again, this time from the south. Elements of Third Army, led by General George S. Patton, push through brutal winter roads toward Bastogne. The spearhead of the relief, most famously elements of the 4th Armoured Division, fights into the outskirts and opens a corridor. Bastogne is not instantly safe, but it is no longer sealed. The German major's ultimatum has its answer. Not a speech, not a negotiation. A perimeter that held, long enough for weather and steel to arrive. The relief of Bastogne is not a curtain drop. It is a narrow opening cut through winter ground. When 4th Armoured Division elements break in on 26 December, the road into town is still under observation and fire. The corridor is thin, and German units continue trying to pinch it shut. Supply trucks move forward cautiously, headlights masked, drivers learning the hard rule of the Ardennes. A straight road is never truly safe. Inside Bastogne, the first changes are practical. Ammunition stocks begin to stabilise. Hot food appears in small amounts. The wounded, some of them lying for days in crowded cellars, can finally be moved out, a process that is slow, risky, and medically urgent. Units rotate positions in brief, imperfect shifts, because even a few hours of sleep can keep a defensive line from collapsing. Outside the town, the fight spreads into the surrounding villages and woods, where the Germans still need time they no longer have, and the Americans now have a chance to take it from them. Bastogne's stand matters because it attacks the offensive where it is weakest: movement. German plans in the Ardennes depend on roads and tempo, on reaching bridges and fuel dumps before Allied strength can fully react. By holding Bastogne through encirclement, the Americans force German units to fight around a blocked hub, burning irreplaceable time and fuel while casualties accumulate in the snow. The surrender demand, rejected, becomes more than a psychological episode. It becomes a marker of a failing timetable. For the soldiers who live through it, the cost is measured in smaller numbers. Frostbite cases, broken units rebuilt from survivors, medics who run out of plasma, artillery crews firing until barrels and nerves feel worn smooth. For civilians, it is a winter of basements and ruined homes, of waiting for the next shell to choose a street. In the wider battle, Bastogne becomes one of the moments the Allies can hold on to as the Ardennes offensive slows, and then reverses. German spearheads are eventually forced back. The initiative returns to the Allies, and the last great German offensive in the West spends itself against reality: logistics, weather, and resistance that refuses to cooperate. But the story doesn't endure because of a single word on a scrap of paper. It endures because of what followed that word: the unglamorous sequence of decisions by ordinary soldiers: hold the road, keep the gun firing, carry the wounded, and stay in the line one more hour until the siege breaks. A surrender demand is supposed to simplify war. It offers a clean ending to a dirty problem. In Bastogne, it failed because the defenders understood what the Germans could not afford to spend. Time. When the German major carried his ultimatum into the American headquarters, he was delivering more than a threat. He was delivering a calculation that cold isolation and fear would do the work of artillery. The Americans answered with something less dramatic and more decisive. A commitment to keep functioning, to keep the perimeter organized, to keep the guns supplied, to keep the wounded alive long enough to be evacuated, to make every hour inside the ring cost the attackers more than it cost the defenders. That is what US soldiers did when surrender was demanded and refused. They did not win by romance or by slogans. They won by the grim craft of soldiering fields of fire, disciplined positions, controlled artillery, and leadership that turned chaos into a schedule. Bastogne became a symbol later. In the moment, it was a town of frozen foxholes and exhausted men who stayed because the road network demanded it, and because the alternative was unthinkable. And when relief finally reached the perimeter, the meaning of the refusal was written in the simplest proof war allows. The line was still there.